archetypes and stories are really potent tools for conveying meaning and for influencing people. And because we're human, we run on stories, we run on symbols, we run on archetypes. And if you aren't aware of the stories and archetypes and metaphors that you are consuming via your TV, books, movies, podcasts, whatever, if you're not aware of what's going in, you are also not aware of how you're being influenced by those things.
I know you're a bigger Marvel fan than I am. I have not rewatched these movies in I don't know how long. I really love the first Iron Man so
It,
much.
it's a good movie.
And we were just watching Transformers, and I was like, this is a direct predecessor. This is a direct consequence of Transformers. The sound design, the look, the CGI, the transforming and putting on. Yeah, birds of a feather. They're just so good.
Yes. Yeah, you can. I mean, there's definitely some DNA that is shared between them all. So this is the first time that I've gone back and watched the original Iron Man in a handful of years, probably. I love the Marvel movies and stuff, but I think I'm certainly drawn towards some of the not the later ones like Phase 4 or 5, but like I don't know, I just love Endgame, and I love the Captain America movies, so I'm more drawn to those. But yeah, watching this through the lens of Militainment certainly colored it different for me.
Just a little bit, right?
Yeah. Especially as we've watched like Black Hawk Down, and I have more my adult eyes on
Yeah.
than I did when I was, I don't know, however old I was when this first came out, a teenager.
Yeah.
And I'm just more aware of the world and how people are portrayed. And I'm just like, how would this do if it came out today?
Anyone track it?
Would come out. Yeah, it would probably be okay if it came out today.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm excited to talk about him. And like I said, I love Captain America. He's one of my favorite superheroes. And I love Captain America because at one point my nephew, who was a child, right? He's like 3 or 4 when he's watching these movies for the first time. He thought that I was Captain America. And dear
Wow.
listener, if you're listening, what I need you to understand about me is that I'm just an attractive, blue-eyed, blonde-haired white man who has just rippling muscles underneath my t-shirts. So of course my nephew would think that I am Captain America.
Dear listener, Madison's tagged in all of our posts. Follow his profile on Instagram.
Go follow me on Instagram. You'll see me doing hiking stuff, rafting stuff, cooking food, and wishing that I was just a hobbit, a little simple hobbit.
Well, that is a great compliment from your nephew. And I will say this, it's like more telling for me to realize the 5 people I'm around and who their favorite superheroes are, because I'm like, we complete our own Avengers. Because I have another couple friends in LA who absolutely love Captain America, and I'm like, he's this smiley goody. And then I realize I'm like, and this is why we work well. My cynicism and your optimism combined for a nice, healthy balance.
Then
I
who are
don't
you in
know.
the Avengers?
I don't know if I'm more Iron Man. I don't think so. I think I honestly liked jaded Thor from Infinity War Endgame a little bit, I really kind
Yeah.
of liked him.
Oh, you
Or
are
I,
Norwegian, so that makes
I
a
am
lot of sense.
Norwegian. I also really loved Hulk, knowing what he's got and also just over analyzing everything Hulk.
Yeah.
So this is a good Rorschach test to be like, who's your favorite
Rorschach
superhero
test.
and why?
No, well, at some point we're going to talk about. We should do a series on like archetypes and sacred texts, which I know we're going to do,
Yeah.
and why they appeal to us. But obviously Captain America appeals to me for reasons.
4 reasons. I've got an aside that I've done a little bit of secondhand research on slash like some interview a friend. I don't know where it fits, but I want to talk about it just briefly, I think, before we dig in. So I don't know if I mentioned this last week. I don't think I did, but one of the listener comments we got was asking if other countries participated in militainment. They were like, does anybody else do this? The answer is undoubtedly yes, but it's very specific countries that do it militainment versus just general country propaganda. Like, of course, you think of like China, like, yeah, obvious militainment. North Korea, well, that's a militainment cult. Like, we won't even go there. It's not even just militainment, it's gospel. Um, the USSR slash Russia, they had quite a handful of obvious militainment or just propaganda. But I want to talk about Japan for a few minutes. So Japan is interesting because Japan has a really weird history when it comes to the military of after their imperial empire was defeated by the United States and Russia and the UK and elsewhere, Australia, they were barred from having a standing military force. So already it puts you in a weird spot. So when the United States occupied Japan in 1947, a new constitution of Japan was drafted. Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution explicitly disavows war as an instrument of state policy and promised that Japan will never maintain a military. So instead of a
Wow.
military, you have what's called the Japan Self-Defense Force, JSDF. That was established 1954 as we would want to say the National Guard here. Now, that being said, the American National Guard is not truly the National Guard because it gets sent to the Middle East and elsewhere to go fight. That's not what a National Guard does. A National Guard should be like Japan's Self-Defense Force, which only stays in the country in case of attack. So, as another aside to this, Japan sees themselves in a very weird light and they don't really know how to talk about themselves because you had an emperor who was like a religious political figure and they saw him as perfect or like a god on earth. They obviously got defeated during the war and then occupied, and then all of that changed. So they don't really know how to talk about World War II. So that's why you see things like Ghibli in this weird space with all of his movies of glorifying the war machine in Japan, but also apologizing, but also not sure how he feels about it, you know?
Well, I don't know. I mean, does Miyazaki? I don't think Miyazaki glorifies the. I mean, he does glorify planes, the airplanes. Like if you watch The Wind Rises, like he's
Yes.
certainly the main character. Like is a guy who's building planes and then has to reckon with the fact that the things that he's building are an instruments of war. But Miyazaki is certainly an anti-violence, anti-war creator.
And sorry, that's a good clarification. When I say the war machine, I don't mean like the war machine is, hey, let's all go fight. More so like the building, like his dad was a
Yeah.
plane builder during the war. His
Yes.
dad built these weapons, these flying weapons. So the gray area is not so much that, yeah, he says we should fight or we shouldn't fight. It's how do I have nostalgia for something that was used in such a terrible way? And how do we say it looks cool? Because it does look cool, but it's bad. So here's the issue. In recent years, the last 10, 20 years, Japanese culture and anime has gotten more militaristic and it's gotten them into hot water. So I've run into a lot more anime, including some shows like Code Geass, which is kind of like a mecha show, a lot of battling, whatever else. That is like the clearest version of propaganda that I've seen in anime ever. And you have a lot more shows like this that services like Crunchyroll are dropping because they're like, we don't really want Japanese propaganda on our service.
Interesting. Do they get
Um,
funding? Are they
they get
funded by?
in part by the Japanese government. So Japan has this interesting thing. They don't have the DoD funding the same way, and you can't explicitly say that the military is funding them, but they have what's called the Japan Cool Fund, the JCF. The Japan Cool Fund is built in the same way as the Korean Cool Fund or whatever Korea's fund is called. They have a fund meant to make them look cool to the rest of the world to increase tourism, goodwill, and love for Japan. So, as part of Japan's Cool Fund, it is a bunch of anime. Japan's Cool Fund helped Pokemon come over here. It helps them like cross borders with things that would just
Wow.
make everyone love Japan. So,
It's literally called the Cool Fund.
sorry, it's a small error, but the Cool Japan Fund is what it's called.
Wow.
There's a company profile on Bloomberg all about making Japan and its services and products cool throughout the world.
I can't tell if the name itself is cool or if it's uncool. But their efforts have obviously worked because the amount of people that love anime in America and
Yeah.
love Japan because we love anime is through the roof.
And yeah, America, Brazil. is huge
Yeah.
on anime. They have some of the biggest subscriber bases. Germany has some of the biggest anime, conventions and love there. The UK is huge. So you have all these, I mean, India anime is gigantic in India right now. So you have these like pockets worldwide that love this. And then you have to ask yourself the question of, oh, if they're putting forth propaganda that says, you know what? Japan lost the war, but they didn't really lose. They got beaten by another imperialist country, and maybe we should still be out there kicking butt and taking land. That's dangerous.
Hmm.
And that's where I think other countries like America do have their own propaganda arm. Korea did it with K-pop. You don't find much propaganda in K-pop. It's just like, hey, K-pop's cool, so is Korean barbecue. So yeah, it's not only an American thing, it just looks a little different as you go place to place. And right now, Japan's in a really weird spot because they now have an article or a bill going through their legal system that could be approved, which says that Japan's able to increase the size of its military and get into foreign conflicts if their allies are involved, which would be the first time Japan goes back to a standing military country. So,
Wow.
all that to say, increase in propaganda, increase in support for the military, increase in military activity. It is clear there's a connection there.
We should send our last episode to them, to the Japanese officials, so that they know that that shit'll kill them.
That shit
It's actually
will
just
kill them.
actually a lot better to just live in peace on their little countrysides, producing content that the rest of the world enjoys.
Reminder about Pearl Harbor. Not a fun time. Looks cool.
Not a fun time.
Not a fun time. I asked some of my Japanese coworkers because I was like, I would like to ask you what you learned about the war, what you learned about propaganda. Now they self-identified as not history people, which I know so many people do, but they did say growing up, they just kind of learned there was a war, it was really crazy, and by the way, the Americans won, and here we are. They don't learn about Japan invading and conquering so much of Southeast Asia or China or the rape of Nanjing, nothing. They just learn there was a war. Oops, we got beat, and now we're all good and we're really technologically powerful.
Interesting.
So it is a different narrative than we might learn here or in elsewhere.
Yeah.
Ask the Chinese about how they feel about Japan. It's not a happy time.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So all that to say, nice aside, quick aside, it does happen
Yeah.
elsewhere. Let's talk about how it happens in Marvel movies and how we ship that elsewhere. What were your
Yeah.
first thoughts rewatching Iron Man?
Boy, I had a lot of thoughts. This one is so clearly, I think of all the Marvel movies, like even more so than Captain America. I don't know, maybe Captain America is a different kind of way, but more so even than Captain Marvel. I think the first Iron Man movie and honestly the second Iron Man movie are really their stories are pretty entwined with Air Force and military aesthetics, right? Because
Definitely.
Tony Stark, he's a weapons manufacturer. He sells weapons to America to go bomb the shit out of the Middle East. And then, obviously with the story, he's learning like, oh, actually, my weapons are being sold under the table to the bad guys as well. And we can talk about what the bad guys are, right? Because didn't love
For
that.
sure.
But you definitely like. I think some of the themes that I was picking out of were like, what's Tony's relationship with peace, and how does that evolve over the course of the MCU? And that was something that I gravitated because I love the idea of peace. And one of Tony's first lines is like, "Oh yeah, yeah, throw up a peace sign, peace. I love peace. I'd be out of a job with peace." But
Yeah.
then, for later on in Avengers Ultron, Age of Ultron, he's like, "Oh, peace in my time. Like my whole goal is to build a weapon so powerful that there's a suit of armor around the world, and that we just have peace, and then I can retire." And so, like Tony's relationship with peace, I think, is something really interesting. And then his relationship with his dad, I feel like, is a metaphor for like how Americans see themselves, because he had a line when he's like, my dad had a saying like, peace is having a bigger stick than the other guy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh wow, I feel like even though I don't think that is a quintessential American saying, but it feels deeply American.
It's a Teddy Roosevelt quote they're kind of riffing off
Yeah,
of.
yeah, it's a riff on that one.
Yeah.
Um, but then he's there was the let's see, what was it was the Jericho missile test,
Yeah.
and what does he say? He said something about like that's how he says that's how Dad did it. That's how America does it, and it's worked out pretty well so far. Which is having a bigger stick than the other guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so Tony's relationship with his dad is kind of a metaphor for his relationship with kind of the American government and the weapons manufacturing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how at first glance, because I had some folks, I think we mentioned this earlier, some folks who, when we mentioned we're going to do the Marvel movies, were like, hey, wait, these are just big critiques of the military. How can they be militainment? But yes, rewatching, you're like, oh, no, it's not. It's really a big critique of weapons manufacturing and things outside of the military's control. And if the
Yeah,
military had control, everything would be better.
yeah, it is because especially I know we didn't watch Iron Man 2, but one of the opening scenes in Iron Man 2 is he's been subpoenaed,
Hmm.
and he's in the Congress or whatever, and uh, they're questioning him, and they're like, "You need to turn over the Iron Man suit to the United States government," and he's like, "No, no, no, I like it's better in my hands than anyone else's hands." And then they show him videos of like other people trying to manufacture these things, and it's kind of like this shit in private hands is dangerous. It's better if
Hmm.
it's in our hands. And that was the whole thing with the Iron Patriot and Iron Man 3, which, yeah, anyways.
Yeah. Whole other situation there. We will have to do the whole Iron Man series at some point.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I found it interesting that, again, it wasn't very veiled, the idea of corporations bad, military good. Um, you have Terrence Howard, poor guy got replaced, as Rhodey, who just is like a smiley, pretty sharp, but not as sharp as Tony, moralistic guy in general. He likes to follow the rules, but he'll also help Tony out in a bind. And he's just been like the voice of reason the entire time, this military advisor. Um, and it is interesting that the whole time you're kind of like, why is he just like the good guy best friend? Why is it like, hey, buddy, buddy, military? Yeah, you're my guy. Interesting choice there. It definitely works because you are like, yeah, he's just a fun-loving friend. I know you were going to bring it up, but we're going to have to just talk about it. This is such a problem of the war. I mean, this is such a product of the war on terrorism and our inability to display people correctly slash just paint everyone as a goat herder. It was rough to watch. I was like, oh man, wasn't Russians anymore. It's just anyone with a turban that's speaking an Arabic sounding language is suddenly bad.
Yeah, because like the Ten Rings, so it's the Ten Rings, right? And
Yeah.
the MCU has later like complicated the Ten Rings with Shang-Chi and stuff, which I thought they
Mhm.
did a really good job with. But as of the first movie, the Ten Rings, I don't really know what their motivations were other than like, oh, I want to rule the world, right? They just want
Yeah.
weapons. They just want
Yeah.
weapons to blow stuff up, and that's it. And like it's not more complex than that, which I think is a disservice to brown people, to Middle
Yes.
Easterners. Like I just, I'm kind of tired of stories that depict American white people as the unquestioning heroes and brown Middle Easterners as the unquestioning villains without any nuance. Like, okay, give me a reason why the Ten Rings are doing what they're doing, because audiences just accept too easily. These guys just want to blow stuff up.
Yeah. I'm sorry, when the Ten Rings goes into the town, which Iron Man later shows up in his suit to kill them all, there's no explanation as to why they're in the town, and they already have the weapons there. I was like, are you trying to tell me the townsfolk bought the Stark weapons? Where do they even factor in? It's just showing, it's just showing maliciousness and malintent for the sake of pointing them as evil.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a product of its times, right?
Yeah.
Because I think if you were to make this today, I feel like there's probably better ways to tell a story about warmongering and American companies who are just weapons manufacturers and are profiting off of war. Because I feel like that was the other one of the central themes is that Tony Stark is trying to get away from the shadow of his dad and his family legacy
Yeah.
of I made money, I made my fortune off of war. And they
Hmm.
spin it in ways of like, oh, ensuring freedom and protecting America's interests, because that's a line from the movie of like, oh, that's how you made your money.
Yeah.
But like in truth, like he made his money off of killing people. And for the scripts, for the sake of the script, it did a good job of not really of not letting Tony get away from that, because even in the beginning when he gets kidnapped by the Ten Rings, and um they're like making the kidnapping video with him or whatever, they say something like, "Oh, Tony Stark is the greatest mass murderer in all of the world," and that is probably true insofar
Yeah.
as his name is on the weapons that are killing people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know that we could ever have a movie like this or if anyone's even interested. But this to me did a good job of giving us a more fictionalized story of like someone like Kalashnikov who created the AK-47, like the gun used by most of the time bad actors across the entire globe, or someone who built easily accessible things like the RPG or other kind of weapons like that where they really did create
If only
mass
we
murder weapons.
If only we'd had a movie that came out in the last couple of years that was about a guy who made a thing that blew up a bunch of people, and it
If
was like 3 hours
only.
long and made by one of our auteurs, and also happened to feature the same actor that was played Tony Stark in it, but he won awards for it. Oh, Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer's that movie.
The Japanese haven't seen that movie, but yes, Oppenheimer is that movie. Speaking of which, yeah, it is. Are you trying to tell me that Iron Man walks so Oppenheimer could run?
Maybe. I mean,
Be
because what certainly came up in Iron Man, Captain America, and Marvel,
yeah.
Captain Marvel, is what is our relationship to power?
Hmm.
And there's like three different takes on what is our relationship to power. And our power being in Iron Man, the power is weapons. Like
Yeah.
that is the metaphorical form that weapons take, or weapons are a symbol for power. And in Iron Man, it's like they don't really necessarily say that the weapons are bad. It's just
Yeah.
who's got their hands on them.
True.
It's not that the bombs are bad. It's who's using them and how are they getting them. Bombs in American hands, good. Bombs in brown Middle Eastern hands, bad.
Yeah.
Bombs that are given to the American government and or sold to the American government, good. Bombs that are sold to Middle East, bad.
And I think that's perfectly pointed out in two scenes in Iron Man. Iron Man comes to save the town. He is, I mean, from an outsider perspective, he's pretty murderous. Everyone gets blasted, blasted, shot, rocket, blasted, blasted, tank blown up, done. It's quick, it's dirty. He's sure not to kill or hurt any of the civilians in some liberal fantasy of an action scene. I was like, zero collateral damage. Perfect. Everyone just creamed their pants. And then you have the flip side of Jeff Bridges, whose character is Obadiah, right?
Obadiah Stane.
Obadiah Stane going back to the surviving members in the camp of the Ten Rings saying, "How'd you guys totally lose all this stuff? Oh my gosh, you should have killed Tony. Why are you trying to screw me?" And then he in turn executes the entire group there, right? Kills them
Yeah.
all. We have two instances of murder, but they've coded one to be like, this is all good. Kill everybody you can see here. This is all bad. Yeah, you shouldn't have done that. Okay. It's just an interesting little, like, it's not even dichotomy. It's
Yeah.
just showing you one scene than the other. It's like some killing is great if you're us.
No, that's funny because they essentially do the same thing. They kill 10 ring bad guys.
Yeah.
Both Obadiah Stane and Tony do it, but it's just, the setting, the script, the tone, and like the story just portrays one is heroic and one is bad.
It's almost like if you were to look at the political situation in 2008 and been like, huh, it's really good if America goes in and gets involved in something and starts shooting up and killing bad guys. But if you look at like Syria or elsewhere, when Russia gets involved, it's bad. You do not do that if you're Russia. You do not
Yeah.
do that if you're Iran or Pakistan or anywhere else. But when we do it, we're the peacekeepers. And that
Yeah.
is exactly like you're saying. Tony and Obadiah are same page as different book. The difference is the intent and the moralism of the person's heart. And there's the one who's selling weapons to the bad guys and then also killing the bad guys. Then there's the one who didn't know he was selling weapons to the bad guys, so he kills the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
But, like it sets up really good character arc. Like that's the beautiful thing about the MCU for me is that
Yeah.
you're setting up these character flaws in Tony Stark, in round one? Did they know that they were going to head towards, Civil War, doing the Civil War arc? Like,
Maybe
we're
not.
like, we need to be put in check. Like, we
Yeah.
go into these things and we do things without any accountability. And like, I think that's one of the great things about the MCU, is that you can get this long form storytelling over the course of a lot of movies, because a lot of these critiques that we're giving, like, kind of, at least narratively, work themselves out a little bit over the course of 15, 20 movies.
Yeah.
um yeah, where, anyways, but yeah, so I think Iron Man is a metaphor for, like, weapons. Power is like, power in the right hands is good, power in the wrong hands is bad, which,
Yeah.
duh, like, you say that and it's just like, well, of course, duh. But it's portraying that the right hands, are the American military and people who are adjacent to the American military.
Yeah, and I had seen some articles, I felt like going back to college. Some articles to like JSTOR and like peer-reviewed pieces that pointed out it's not that the military is openly saying we should control the manufacture and distribution of weapons, but it's kind of hinting at the fact that that wouldn't be a terrible idea. This kind of idea of you can't militarize and enable bad actors if it's all just the military. We're not going to fight ourselves, but companies will make us fight ourselves. And it's interesting thinking about how the military is portrayed here and then the next couple Marvel movies before we get to Captain America. But like Iron Man shows the military in good light when it comes to their aid in general, right?
Mhm.
And even Shield is not like the FBI. The Shield's a little bit better and they help out, and Pepper Potts is joined by them, and most of them get killed by Obadiah, but who cares? Incredible Hulk that comes right after this movie in theatrical release. I don't remember how it comes in the actual MCU timeline.
I think after.
Okay, but that Hulk is facing the military, right? The military is the antagonists. That does not carry over at all through the rest of the movies. That was a one-off, and we never see it again in the same way throughout the rest of the movies. So it is interesting to me that, yeah, you already talked about Iron Man 2 and 3, that gets more militaristic, but even with one, it doesn't take any notes from Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, but it does this idea of just bad actors, that you can have a bad apple
Yeah.
in the bunch, because you got Thunderbolt Ross and you've got the other
Hmm.
guy who turns into Abomination, Eli Roth, Emil Blonsky, that they're bad actors using the power, the might of the American military for, nefarious deeds for their own ideals.
Yeah.
So I think, if Iron Man, yeah, I don't know how we put a button on Iron Man.
Let me just button up with one last little bit about the DoD.
Yeah,
How much did the DoD like this movie? What did they fund it? They gave Jon Favreau and Paramount and the filmmakers access to $1 billion worth of military equipment.
holy
From
cow.
the planes we see that are, again, the military has to allow you to show their current model fighter jets. If not, you have to use something older. So those current model fighter jets, the tanks, the weapons, everything else, that's all from the DoD. And they let them shoot almost the entire movie, other than some stuff on sets. They shot most of it at Edwards Air Force Base in California. So everything out in the desert, all the rest of it's all on Edwards Air Force Base with military background actors. So,
Wow.
and that came about with the DoD vetting the script, and the Air Force specifically made changes, though no one can tell you what the changes were. The Air Force made changes to the entire script to fit what they wanted done.
Of course they did.
So, do they like this movie? They like this movie. Any fun quotes you want to share before we move on to Cap?
Yeah. Tony says, let's see. I already did some of them. Tony says that he's become comfortable with a system that takes zero accountability. And that's a line that I think, it could be a criticism of, the American war machine, honestly.
Hmm.
But it's also a line that carries his character arc through, all of his other appearances. Um, Tony says, I am not my company.
Yeah.
And that's him trying to, like, uh, not take accountability for the actions of his company. Um, Obadiah Stane says to Tony, he says, "Your father help bring us the atomic bomb. What kind of a world would it be if he was as selfish as you?"
Yeah.
Which I thought, like, oh wow, what a gaslighting sort of thing of turning it around and being like, you're so selfish of not wanting to like share your weapons, your Iron Man suit with me in the world.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of a world would it be if your dad didn't build the atomic bomb on the Manhattan Project, uh, blow people up?
And level our enemies.
Yeah, and then he goes on to say that we need weapons to steer the world back on course. As if we don't need politics, we don't need like diplomacy and charm and compassion to steer the world back on course. We need weapons to steer the world back on course. And that's Obadiah Stane, and he's the villain. And like,
Yeah.
you got to take the things the villains say with a grain of salt, but nonetheless, it is being said on screen by Jeff Bridges.
It is being told to the audience as a statement of sorts. I don't have any more than that. I think you covered some of the ones I had on there. I loved at the beginning. Rhodey says, he's at that awards conference. He says, "When I put on my uniform in the morning and look in the mirror, I know everyone else with a uniform has got my back." Just straight out of a recruitment campaign. The other one, Stark at the weapons test, he's like, "Is it better to be feared or respected?" I say, "Is it too much to be both?" And even though he's being a cheeky bastard and sounds like Michael Scott right here trying to do that,
Yes.
inspirational moment, kind of works for the entire film of saying, you know what, we should be feared and respected. And that's
Yeah.
how you know that we're going to be the protectors. So, a
Yeah.
couple fun quotes. Rest of our criteria real fast. Do they lose more than once? Obviously, the scene where Tony gets captured. Past that, I don't think the military itself loses again.
No, well, no. I mean, as Tony Stark being a stand-in for the military, no, because he just
Yeah.
wins.
Yeah. It just like it's superhero Rocky. So yeah, he just gets his back up, back up, back up.
Yeah,
Okay. Are they instrumental in the final victory? Tony and his ingenuity is, of course, with the help of civilian Pepper Potts.
and Road,
Um,
Colonel
and
Road,
Road. Yeah, that's true.
he does. He goes and he helps him out, getting in his suit, and he's like, "Next time, baby." And it wasn't Terrence Howard.
I know, poor Terrence. Are the servicemen moral and good people? Do they have a turn to become moral and reformed? Every single person in the military seems to be great in this movie.
Yeah, they do.
Stylistic shots and emotive moments. Yeah, between Back in Black and the Humvee and the Americana of the three people riding with Tony and taking a selfie, him calling the driver woman hot. The javelin missile test just looks badass and it is
And like,
badass.
and is Tony Stark just not like a billionaire philanthropist playboy? Like, that's the American dream.
It is. Yeah.
He is the fulfillment of the American dream, and
Yep.
he's a nepo baby. So
Yeah. Also, one more thing they did point out, which I was going to say similar to these criteria, he points out at one point when the reporter from Brown is asking him all kinds of questions. He says IntelliCrops, medical advances, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. All this comes from military funding. And it is true. And I do understand it is true to an extent. That a lot of these advances do come this way. But it was just like reminding the audience of like, not a military problem. We help you with all this stuff. It's really just an arms manufacturer corporate problem. So.
yes, yeah.
Bad, bad corporations. Let's move on to a much more moral and just cause. Let's talk about Captain America, the First Avenger, and how beating Hitler reminds us what it's all about.
Okay. Well, I think there's two things going on in this movie. Number one is that it's a World War II movie. And in World War II, it's not necessarily the complicated mid 2000s America in the Middle East situation, right?
Yeah,
Where the bad guys aren't as clear. Like that's kind of the benefit at least of World War II stories is that it's pretty clear who the bad guy was.
for sure.
Um, and so we get to paint with really broad brushstrokes, and no one's going to complain about
Yeah.
it. and
No
then,
one's
and
in
then
Hitler's corner.
no one's in Hitler's. Well, no one should be in Hitler's corner.
True.
Um, and then the second thing here is that we're playing around with like rather than weapons, this is about the American servicemen
Yes.
and how great they are. And this isn't about weapons. It's about American good old boy strength.
It's interesting because the way in which they refer to Steve Rogers is that, yeah, he's not a weapon. Captain America is not Iron Man. It's not, oh my gosh, they created super soldier weapon. It's just the fact, and they point this out early on with Stanley Tucci's wonderful Jewish doctor character, Dr. Abraham Ernstine. They point out that the serum just amplifies what's inside. And so
Yeah.
at the very heart of it, Steve is just this American boy, and it just amplifies good, hardworking, moral, respectful to women in general, Americana that's just out there to stop the bad guys. And that's all it
Yeah.
amplifies. And if
Yeah.
I was thinking about coming home to Peggy Carter, I would rush into Hitler's lair too. You know, Haley Atwell is enough of a reason to go to war.
That's the truth. Ain't that the truth?
It
That's the truth.
is the truth. So either way, yeah, this was surprising to me. I mean, did you see this in theaters or were you already on your mission?
I was a missionary at this point, so I came home to see this.
Okay. So I saw this in theaters. Theaters were packed. People love this movie. And I forgot about it because it's not one I like ever wanted to revisit. But $370 million worldwide, it was popular.
That's pretty good. Um, yeah, I think what I love about Captain America as a character so much is the thing that you pointed out is that Erskine's formula works to amplify what is already there.
Yeah.
And it takes good and it makes it better, and it takes bad and it makes it worse. And the Captain America's actual superpower is not his rippling muscles, even though he has the rippling muscles. His actual superpower is that he's a really good guy. That's his superpower, is that he has no guile. Erskine asks him, why do you want to go to Germany? He's like, do you want to kill Nazis? And he's like, no, I don't want to kill anyone. I just don't
Yeah.
like bullies.
Yeah.
And to Steve Rogers, a bully is someone who's misusing power to like lift themselves up, and the power becomes about them rather than the power to protect people.
Yeah.
And so like that's the American good old boy. And like I'm not going to say that I don't like that, because I like that. I think if I was to write a thesis on how
Hmm.
power should be used in the service of others, and if it is used in the service of yourself. And
Yeah.
so, one of the archetypal reasons that I love Captain America so much is because I fundamentally agree with its idea of how to use power, and that Captain America's real superpower is that he knows how to use power, and that's an amazing thing.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I had less problems with this one than I thought I was going to. Even seeing the broad propaganda, it is
Mhm.
the good and moral backing of like, well, you can't really argue with that aspect, like you're saying, how they
Yeah,
kind of frame power. It's not that, and I do say that Disney cleaned up everybody when they took over with event. They bought into Avengers, and then later on they bought the rest, right?
yeah,
He does seem to womanize off screen a little bit. We kind of get the
yeah, a little
idea
bit.
he's really macking and getting it, but it's not to the level of absolute playboy, and it never feels nefarious. It just feels like, okay, the skinny boy gets to enjoy the limelight a little bit. Sure, right? And we just don't see him do much bad, if any at all, in the entire movie.
Yeah, I mean, so number one, the one time he did kiss someone in the movie, that wasn't Peggy Carter. He felt very uncomfortable with it. So he was like,
No,
"Oh,
true.
I'm actually like in love with Peggy Carter, but this girl's like advancing on me." He's like, "Oh, well, I don't know." He's so uncomfortable with it because he's so unskilled at talking to women.
Yes.
Because even though he's rippling with muscles, he's still that skinny whelp on the inside. And then secondly, he can't get drunk, so he
Oh,
can't
that's
even like
right.
he can't actually he's immune to the one thing uh that gets like all servicemen, which is alcoholism.
Yep.
He's immune to it. It doesn't work on him. So of course he's even more golden boy.
And we just love a golden boy. We love an American golden boy. We also love
Yeah.
Tommy Lee Jones as a drill instructor because he's fantastic. He again was just very Americana.
Oh yeah. Like
Um,
he was
and
he fit into that role so well.
oh
I didn't
yeah,
even question it. I was just like, oh, there's a World War II sergeant general guy. Like I believed it. I didn't even think that it was Tommy Lee Jones.
And it's interesting thinking of who they cast for Captain America. So, of course, they wanted Chris Evans. He didn't want it at first. He really was like, no, the limelight, whatever else. I've already played superheroes. Okay. And they convinced him to take it. He got paid like 300 grand, which sounds like a lot, but also like
That's
at the
it.
beginning of the Marvel movies, that was his first start. But let's talk about who else was in the running. Will Smith. They weren't about to
Interesting.
they weren't about to do that. Wyatt Russell, who of course we see later, who comes back
Yeah.
as John Walker.
Yeah.
Sam Worthington, who was just fresh off Avatar. So he was kind of hot at that time. Avatar and Terminator.
Yeah.
They looked at Channing Tatum. They looked at Garrett Hedlund. They looked at Scott Porter, Mike Vogel, Sebastian Stan was in the running. John Krasinski was in the running. Chase Crawford, Jensen Ackles, Alexander Skarsgård. So we have this huge grouping of people, and yet it came down to Evans because out of all of them, he looks the most clean cut, good boy American.
He does. He does. There's a softness in his eyes. Like you just believe that he is without guile.
Yeah. His dramatic, emotive stares he gives at moments are so pure. You're like, is he Jesus or is he Captain America? And I think that's the perfect crossover for this aspect of militainment of this movie's all about the bad guys are Hitler, the good guys are Americans. He has his ragtag crew with Bucky and the other boys he takes with him. We see some characters we just continually see in war movies. We're like, oh my gosh, they're just forever going to be soldiers. He's sick and tired of selling war bonds, and he just has to take the fight to the Nazis. He has to be the good guy. And I think this is that movie to kind of point out, like, guess what? You don't have to trust, your commanding officer that says you should be selling war bonds or whatever. You have to trust your heart as an American. And as an American, we know we have to take out the bad guys. That's what you have to do. It's really like a big call to arms in the best way.
Yeah. Um, I think something that I don't love, and I know it's just because we are 80 years removed from this time in American history,
Yeah.
is the idea that in order to be a good man, you need to enlist and
Yeah.
you need to sign up because like that's Steve's whole thing before he gets selected by Erskine is that like he tries and fails under different aliases to be recruited
Yep.
for the war effort. And he's like, what kind of a man am I to be if I just let everyone else go out there and do all the killing and I'm just here? And it's like, why is that your standard of manhood and masculinity? Like, and I know that there was a cultural moment like 80 years ago where that was like, that's a real thing. People were lying about their age to sign up because they like, I don't know. I can't imagine being so possessed by a cause that I would sign up to go to the military. But that's accurate.
Yeah. It's like that Pearl Harbor quote from the British chap of, you American boys just can't wait to die. And,
Yeah.
Ben Affleck's, no, we just can't wait to matter or do something that matters.
Oh man, that is so true of Captain America.
Yeah.
Because he, is selling the war bonds, but the second that he has an opportunity to like do something meaningful, he doesn't even think twice. I mean, and that's not a character defect. Like that's the point of his character
Yeah.
is that he doesn't need. Oh yeah, this is the point of his character. He doesn't need a supervising officer.
Yeah.
He doesn't need an authority to watch him. He can just act, and his actions are good, and you can trust them.
And we get that little funny quote in Avengers. Oh yeah, Thor's a god, and he's like, "I know God, man, but he doesn't look like him, or he doesn't dress like that, right?" It's direct tie into morality, to religiosity, to Christianity, to community. He's just the boy from Brooklyn, the Bronx,
Yeah, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. Okay,
But like to contrast him with Tony Stark, like it's a needed contrast, right?
it
Because
is. Yeah,
the relationship between those two kind of carries a lot of the Avengers movies. So Tony Stark is a gun,
yeah,
and Captain America is a shield. And
yeah,
I think those two symbols are really important to their characterization and how they envision the use of power. Right? Tony Stark is like, I've become comfortable in a system that takes no accountability. And Steve Rogers doesn't need accountability because you can just trust that he'll do the right thing every time. And he would actually do well in a system without any accountability. And the
Yeah.
accountability later on in the movies is the thing that drives him nuts. And that's the whole point of Civil War, is that Steve is like, hey, I don't need anyone telling me what to do.
Yeah.
Because don't you get it? I'm Captain America. I don't do wrong.
I am the good guy.
I am the good guy.
Let's take it directly to our criteria. What were some of your favorite cool or badass lines?
Obviously, Steve Rogers, I could do this all day. Like, what a character line for him. And what
Hmm.
a, like, that's kind of a line that most, like, the real superpower that a lot of these superheroes have in the comics is that they just get back up. They just, like, they get knocked down, they will always get back up again. Like, that's a Spider-Man thing, that's a Wolverine thing, that's a Captain America thing. They all have different lines about saying it, but I love that Captain America line of, I could do this all day.
Yeah.
And then I love the line of, I just don't like bullies.
It's just such a good one. It takes it right down
Yeah.
to our inner child. It's like, yeah, you're right. Beat the bullies up.
Yeah. And then I think it's Tommy Lee Jones's character, Patton. He says, wars are fought with weapons, but won by men.
Uh,
And like that is a direct contrast with the Tony Stark character, but also it highlights why Captain America, Steve Rogers, is so good, is because he's a good man.
yeah.
And, if being a good man is the ultimate weapon, of course that's why Captain America just steamrolls all of Hydra every time he shows up. It's because he's the ultimate weapon.
He is the ultimate weapon, the good moralist, good guy. Some of my favorites when Bucky first sees Steve and he's just like looking him up and down, like obviously looking at how much bigger he's gotten. He goes, "What happened to you?" And Steve goes, "I joined the army." And that to me is the perfect recruitment moment, the militainment that at least it's cheeky enough you have to smile. And then Peggy Carter also asks him, how do you feel? And all he says is taller. It's not like stronger, I'm gonna whatever. He's like, I'm taller and I've joined the army. That's what matters, folks.
Yes, it is.
I love when he's so done with the war bond selling and he's ready to go back and to fight. And everyone's like, how do you even know what you're going to do? Whatever. And he tells the table of guys, like, I've knocked out Hitler 200 times. I can do this. And it's just the perfect comedic blend of like fantasizing and duty and preparation all at once. It's just great. Past that, there's a lot of like good speeches between the Red Skull and Steve Rogers. Like arrogance is a uniquely American trait. It's not a uniquely American trait, but you do it better than everybody. And Steve's just kind of like, yeah, well, you're insane. And so Red Skull is like, everyone resents my genius. I might not be insane, but I'm rightfully supposed to be a god among you. What makes you special? And he's like, nothing. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn. And it's just that
What a line.
Americana. It's great and it hits you. And even though you want to cringe, you're like, yeah, but it's good. It's
It's
just
good.
good.
I mean, and that's something that shows up throughout the MCU, is this question of like, what makes you so special?
Yeah.
And for Steve to just be kind of self effacing and be like, nothing makes me special.
Yep.
But I'm just a kid from Brooklyn, but I'm here to kick your ass.
Just a kid from Brooklyn gonna gonna shut everything down. It's good. It's great. I didn't realize until watching it. I was like, I forgot how much the stupid Tesseract is in all these movies.
Yeah,
It's
it's
in
it's the MacGuffin.
it. Yeah, it's just King MacGuffin out there. Well, that takes us to the other Captain. Let's go, Captain Marvel, 2019. The world has changed, but did we? Did you love this movie the first time you saw it?
Yeah, I did. I know that, there's a lot of Marvel fans who hate Captain Marvel, and I think they hate Captain Marvel because she's a woman. She's a
Yeah,
powerful woman.
yeah,
And there's a lot of people who are like, oh, she's a Mary Sue. And I'm just like, maybe, who cares? It's
yeah.
fun. It's a fun movie to watch. And I feel like trying to, so yeah, I liked the movie. I like the character. I like the character in the comics. Captain Marvel's really fun in the comics.
Hmm.
And I think with the adaptation, maybe they've struggled a little bit in the adaptation with it, especially in her power scaling. Like,
Yeah.
like, anyways, we'll go there later maybe. Uh, but when it comes to a movie about militainment, I kind of struggled with it because it wasn't necessarily about the Air Force. Like there was kind of like some touch points in it that like were like, oh, this is clearly inspired by Top Gun. But for the most part, it was kind of a story about aliens.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people that had issues with it felt it was too political about refugees and all this situation that's real, first off. Second off, I didn't think it was as heavy-handed this time watching it. I was like, oh, maybe it's just that it's not fresh in the theaters, but it doesn't seem all that big of a deal. It is about aliens. It is about refugees. It is about a domineering, mind-controlling force that's chasing down these people who just want to live. So it's weird in the way that it's like almost a critique. At the same time, the Kree are not implicitly or explicitly the U.S. military, and I don't think they're meant to be seen that way. It's
No.
almost more like a North Korea or like a cult group in
Yeah.
their own thing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting with this one is it was filmed on Edwards Air Force Base again. So, given all that space, yeah, it's a little Top Gun coded. I mean, they changed the name of the cat from Chewie from the comics after Chewbacca
Yeah.
to Goose after Top Gun. Okay, that's kind of fun. But it's interesting in that I didn't think it was as, like you're saying, militaristic as I expected it to be. To know that it really changed recruitment for women in the Air Force, I was like, where's all the women in
It
the Air
did?
Force moment? It had some impact. They weren't going to give full numbers, but it did have some impact on female recruitment numbers.
Hmm.
So I'm watching like, where? Why? How?
Yeah. I mean, there's that one scene. I mean, okay, so in Top Gun, you got the original Top Gun, you got the scene where, Tom Cruise says the line, I got a need for speed. That's his
Yeah.
line, right?
And they say it.
And then, which is kind of cringe. And then in this one, you get Carol Danvers to Monica Rambeau. She's like, higher, higher, further, faster, baby, which is in truth a line from the comics. That's her tagline is
Yeah.
higher, further, faster, or something along those lines. And yeah, that's sure, okay, yeah, it's like show powerful women in front of aircraft saying cool lines. Yeah, I guess that's a recruitment ad.
Well, so here's the thing for everyone listening. This movie came out with a 30-second recruitment video. And that was like the stronger recruitment thing. So to inspire women and girls to become pilots, the Air Force produced a 30-second recruitment ad called Origin Story that coincided with a theatrical release and was put in 3,600 theaters across the US and then put across internet and social media platforms. So it shows
Huh.
two F-15s zipping through the sky, firing rockets, Air Force bases in the sunshine, lots of female fighter pilots saluting and kind of walking around. And there's a female narrator, and there's a fantastic article I'll have linked that kind of gives the full script of it. It says, every superhero has an origin story. We all got our start somewhere. For us, it was the U.S. Air Force. And towards the end, she says, what will your origin story be? And then it encourages women to aim high. And it says aim high, shows the USAF logo, URLs for recruitment platforms, everything else. So then when these women hit the website, it like has all these quotes where it's like female pilots serving the Air Force reach new heights every day. They inspire everybody. Join them, wear the uniform, and know you're going to inspire the next generation. So there's a full-on application right under that quote where you just put your info in and a recruiter would call you on the
Wow.
spot. So kind of like that Independence Day one we talked about at the beginning of our
Yeah.
series. It wasn't as much in the movie as I expected it to be, but it was preceded by this website and ad. And if anyone went back to see it a second time, they just got that pushed again. Just saying, if you like this movie, you'd like joining the Air Force. And that was the stronger militainment moment.
Because there's nothing more like the Air Force than space aliens and
Oh, yeah.
espionage. And yeah, that's ridiculous. Something that I did pick up. So, okay, so you've got Shield and you've got the CIA, you got the Air Force or whatever, and you got the Project Pegasus. And Project Pegasus is this thing where you've got Marvell, who's a Kree scientist who's now on Earth trying to develop a lightspeed engine for the sake of the scrolls so that they can, move faster than light. Anyways, I didn't really get into the details because they're already moving
To
faster than light
leave?
to use their jump portals and stuff. But
Yeah.
anyways, so she's working on the lightspeed engine and at Project Pegasus, which is an Air Force secret project. And the line is, the work at Pegasus was to end war, not fight them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a line that's like, hey, the work that we're doing here in the military, we're trying to end wars. We're not trying to fight them. We're trying to end wars by fighting them. We're not trying to fight wars to continue fighting them. We're trying to end wars by fighting them.
We
I
just
don't.
love
What's so
that.
confusing about that? What's so confusing about us trying to end wars by continuing to fight wars?
Yeah. We're going to end obesity by making the best donuts. And that
Yeah.
will, and somehow end obesity. It's just, and I think we've talked about it before. I don't know if it's the Tao Te Ching or elsewhere, where it's no war can be ended by war.
Yeah. I mean, that's like fundamental to nonviolence is that like you cannot achieve peace through violence. It just is antithetical to peace.
And you'd think we would have figured it out with all of our stupid naming conventions of like World War One. We're like the war to end all wars. This is it, folks. Not even 20 years later, we're like, back for the sequel. And then, of course, that ends. And within 10 years, at least the United States, but of course, worldwide, conflicts are just all over the place. Where political ideologies or religious or elsewhere, we're just going to go bomb the shit out of everybody.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that yes, that is kind of the take on it all. I think it's interesting to me that Carol Danvers is so disrespectful and questioning authority the whole time when I'm kind of like, isn't that antithetical to the military in general? You take your orders,
Yeah, but
but
she's
it's
funny and spunky, so it's okay.
but she's funny and spunky, and it's almost like it's making room for questioners who are just going to have a better answer from their Marvel, from their commanding officer, who's like,
Yeah.
no, no, we're not the bad guys. We're trying to help everybody out here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just,
I mean, but it is to follow the idea of like the metaphor of what do we do with power? How do you use power? Captain Marvel does the same thing that Captain America does. She doesn't use power to self-aggrandize. She's a good old boy. She's a soldier. She
yep,
uses power in the defense of others. And once she realizes that she's been brainwashed and duped, she does an about face and she uses her powers for the sake of the refugees and for the sake of the weak. Um, and there's an entire feminist message in here about the fact that she has power and that the thing that she believes is giving her power is actually the thing dampening her power, and it's a construct. Anyway, so there's a whole feminist like layering in there that this is not the podcast to go into.
well,
Um, but
soon enough.
soon enough, that's what we're gonna get. The next series, two white men talking about feminism.
Now, hold
Just
on,
kidding.
hold on. I will say I have some emails out to some professors on gender studies. I just
Really?
heard back from a professor on Catholicism, which will be for something we'll talk about later in the
Cool.
episode. I do have some emails out specifically asking for opinions on film and television and representation. So we will go there at some point.
No, absolutely, because we've been teasing wanting to go into masculinity a bunch,
But yeah, I have emails of those people too. Yeah, we're gonna go
and if
both.
we go into
We're
masculinity,
going
we're going to go
both.
into femininity. Yeah, you're right. So
2025,
you
just
heard it here
strap in for
first.
genders, baby.
You heard it here first. Indie Magazine podcast. We're going to talk about genders, and two white guys are going to give it to you.
No, two
But
white guys are gonna
anyways,
be you. Anyways,
two white guys are going to be you.
yeah,
Anyways, the point is, Captain Marvel uses her power in the defense of other people, and that's kind of the superhero ethic. Like that's the idea is that
yeah.
like, oh, America is so powerful and mighty, but we use our power for other people to protect and defend people. We don't use our power to warmonger and make profit. Why would we do that? To
Not
gain
little
oil
old
and
us. No.
resources and to put bases all around the world so that we can nuclear strike anyone within minutes? Like, why would we wouldn't do that? No, we're here to protect little guys.
AC-130s and drones can only fly so far. It's not our fault. Well, I'm going to wrap one thing up before we do our quotes and criteria. You talked about recruitment efforts. I had to do a quick search because it was in the article I had pulled up that I'm going to link in the show notes, but I was like, where is this? Um, it was the highest percentage of female applicants to the Air Force in years, 31.2% application rate of females to males, where in the past years it had been 26.5% before 2019 and had been lower and lower and lower as you go back to the 2010s. So we're talking like a 5% jump in proportion for females among men
Wow.
versus men in the Air Force. So that's a pretty
Wow.
big jump.
Yeah, that is a big jump.
And if we want to talk about why, once again, we just love when they show us the stuff they shouldn't be showing us. The video, when it was shared online, the recruitment video, saw 173,000 clicks to the recruitment website from the video. The
Wow.
video itself had 11 million views and 200 million impressions.
Wow.
So we're still talking about like America, 350 million people. You break it into subsets. What's the age group? What's the demographic? Whatever else. But that's a pretty huge amount seeing this advertisement. And again, 173,000 clicks. That's $100,000 plus that anyone would pay a marketing agency to try and get. Those are like dream numbers. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, increasing the proportion of females to men in the Air Force by 5% in a year, pretty big. Pretty
That's a lot.
pretty big. So yeah.
Huh.
Favorite quotes? Anything that popped out to you that you really loved?
I don't know. This one didn't. I didn't feel like it had as many quotable moments as Captain America or Tony Stark, just because
Yeah.
they're so quotable. The only one I'm remembering is the higher, further, faster, baby quote.
Yeah. I know a lot of points she kind of says, she refuses to fight Jude Law's character with full powers, and she's like, I have
Yeah.
nothing to prove to you.
Oh
And that
yeah.
is a nice moment of like, yeah, you're right. Let's be feminist for a second. Shut up. And I
Yeah.
do love her taking him out in the end when he's like, fight me no powers, let it really prove to me. And she's like, what? Blast. Boom, kind of nice.
Actually, yeah, that is really that because I remember watching it and being like, that's a really good representation of how a lot of people will like in order to I don't think gaslighting, that's not the right word, but like ask you to tie a hand behind your back in order to like
Yeah.
fight fair, right?
Which is a quote
And
she gives.
yeah, and I mean, I feel like that is certainly something that we've, that has been one of the plights of women in the world is that we ask them to tie a hand behind their back when it comes to contributing to the world by being mothers
Yeah.
and not compensating them fairly. And anyways, we'll jump into that stuff later on. But I thought that was a really good moment in the movie.
Yeah, and I guess beyond quotes, the montage of her standing up, I understand to many, and even to me, at some points it was like a little bit cheesy, but I know what it was doing, and if I was a young woman watching this movie and impressionable and looking for a hero, it's a pretty great hero moment, you
Oh, it
know?
is.
She's
Yeah.
breaking free from this authoritarian mind control figure. She's realizing her own power, and she's just seeing all these moments in her life where she had to stand back up. She gets told she can't, and she has to stand back up. And that to me, honestly, was nice to watch this time. I was like, oh, it's a
Yeah.
good moment, and it's really well done.
Yeah. I mean, and that's her Captain America moment of I could do this all day.
Yeah.
That's the idea is that these superheroes, the thing is about them is that they will always get back up again. And that's what makes them special.
Yep. All right. Military wise with this one, yeah, I think we've kind of covered it. Maria Rambo is present, or Monica Rambo.
Yeah, I think Monica and I think Maria is her daughter.
You're right. Maria shows up in the second one. We don't really see a ton of military stuff. We have Nick Fury. I have questions as to a lot of the things that go on with Nick Fury in this movie. He's fun. He's comedic. The cat scratching his eye. I was like, why do we have to have that be the reason? Who knows?
I know. We should have just left it a mystery.
Left it a mystery. Yeah, shots in LA were great. Anyways, fun movie. Which of the three gets you to want to join the military?
Captain America, baby.
For sure.
I am American's golden boy. I want to be Captain America. I will. You give me 10 more of him, I'll sign up.
Yeah, it just is it's a great one. It's a great movie and it does its job really well.
Yeah.
I'm here for Cap. Yeah, Iron Man makes me question the military industrial complex more and
Yeah, it
outside
does.
weapons manufacturers. Past that, I don't think Iron Man is like, you know what? I'd like to fly in the plane that Iron Man has to shoot out of the sky. Probably not.
What it did make me do when I left the theater after the first time I saw it when I was a kid, I was just like, do you think that they're building those? Do you think that they're building like mechanical exoskeletons? And I certainly went through a Google deep dive when I was like 15 or something about mechanical exoskeletons.
Well, you do know that the military, after the popularity of the first Iron Man movie, actually did open up a project called the Iron Man Project. The military's was called the Talos, TALOS, the Tactical Assault Light Operator Suit. It was a next gen suit for elite soldiers. It needed 365 pounds worth of batteries. I can't imagine why it didn't ever work. 2019, the project was abruptly shut down. They said the final project was nowhere near what the sales pitch was, but they are still developing the technology behind closed doors.
Of course they are.
So,
Someone should tell them that they need a miniaturized arc reactor,
yeah, it's so
and that
simple.
Tony Stark built it in a cave with a box of scraps.
How did they miss that? That's a really good question. Now, the funny
312
part
pounds
is,
of batteries. No, 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 no. You just get a little guy, put it in your chest.
it is funny to me that like other countries are developing their own versions of this kind of technology. America's really good about keeping it secret and like we just keep it in the vault until 20 years later. But we like to make fun of everybody else's. So Russia in 2018, as we were closing this Talos project, they released something called the Ratnik 3, which that just sounds like a terrible pizza thief's name. Anyway, but it's their version of an Iron Man suit. It has this like motorcycle looking helmet with just a visor and it's padded, but it still allows for movability. So, anyways, and when you see the suit, you just realize that's been put into other Marvel movies and other shows, and you're like, oh, this is just the bad guy suit. Okay, glad we're already
Yeah.
giving us subliminal messaging. But maybe we'll see an Iron Man suit one day. Until then, we're just gonna make sure you have a nice outfit when you're drafted, so you look like Captain America. Well, this wraps up our Militainment series. What have we learned? What are we taking home with us?
Here's what I'm taking home with us. Um, I can't tell you how many of my friends I was talking to Militainment about, and they had no idea that the Department of Defense funds movies.
Yeah.
They just had no idea. And so the thing that I'm always thinking about is like archetypes and stories are really potent tools for conveying meaning and for influencing people. And because we're human, we run on stories, we run on symbols, we run on archetypes. And if you aren't aware of the stories and archetypes and metaphors that you are consuming via your TV, books, movies, podcasts, whatever, if you're not aware of what's going in, you are also not aware of how you're being influenced by those things. Um, and so, like, my plug for our listeners is
Wonderful.
that we need to become savvy audience members so that we can be aware of what is being shown on screen so that we don't just swallow everything without a second thought. Because otherwise, we will start ingesting a lot of bad ideas and a lot of subliminal messaging that we might not actually consent to.
And then we wonder how we got those ideas and beliefs 5 years down the road, and we just believe that they've always been there.
Yeah, like growing up, I just assumed that Middle Easterners were the bad guys.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was an adult that I was like, oh, actually, no, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But if you just watch movies and TV shows, like that is so often just how bad guys are depicted. And we need to like take a step back and become savvy consumers of stories so that we not that we don't want to be influenced by stories, because some stories we want to be influenced by, but we just want to do it with an awareness of what's happening to us.
Yeah, that's probably my big takeaway with this one too, is it doesn't mean you have to stop watching these movies. It doesn't mean you have to, by any means, shun anything that depicts the military in any form, because that's just a little silly at this point.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, you have to be able to pick apart the influences and the thesis statement and the intended messages and just how certain people and organizations and ideologies are portrayed. Because if not, like you're saying, you're just being consistently acted upon with absolutely no regard for the source of these things. I had a conversation with someone recently, we'll keep this vague as possible, about propaganda. And we were talking about Ronald Reagan or taxes or different ethnic groups and their drug usage and why they're so often in prison. And I was like, we're at a different time now with TikTok, YouTube, the more availability of information and critiques that was not there years ago. You had a handful of cable channels, you had someone in your town, you had books in a library, but you weren't just walking down the aisles of military and propaganda and being like, aha, you know what? Stubbs, I'm just going to read about militainment. And I think that in this day and age, there's a call to be more informed because there's an availability and opportunity to be more informed. And so, for anyone of any age, I think it's just important to check your sources, but also just check any intention, any pushed agenda, anything like that to say, what am I doing by consuming this and not asking questions? Okay, that's an intent to kind of keep here. Because like you, I talked to a lot of people. I mean, this has been our series that's gotten the most chatter from my friends, and they're always like, "Well, what's the problem with it? So what if the military pays for it?" It's like, okay, well,
Okay, well.
if they shape who you think the bad guys are and who the good guys are, and it becomes black and white, you're in a pickle. And whether we're talking about, and we're not going to go into it, but Israel or conflicts in Africa with like well, almost like Black Hawk Down, we see these civil wars, or the situation with Russia and Ukraine, or Japan and their Cool Japan Fund. There are just questions to be asked and biases to be checked, so you don't just get caught up in propaganda, believing it to be fact at all times.
Yeah. Yeah. But when you're aware of some of these things that are happening, you can consume these medias and then compensate for it and then enjoy them.
And then
Like
enjoy the hell out of them.
I enjoy the hell out of Top Gun Maverick is one of my favorite movies. The
Yeah.
Transformers movies, love them. I know what they're
Mhm.
trying to do and I can compensate fairly. And when I watch Transformers, I'm like, bullshit, that is not how it is. I can watch it and just enjoy it. I can enjoy Optimus Prime doing his thing.
And that's the important part. If you want to really enjoy something without having any worries, yeah, do a little research, do a little digging, put yourself in check, and then you're good. Then you are good. Maybe not good, but at least you're informed. Do we have a title for this episode with Marvel? Marvelous Militainment?
I don't know how to use power. I mean, that's not as catchy, but that's kind of what the theme is.
Power 101?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Let's go with that.
Before we close up today's episode, we're going to quickly discuss our next series, which is Papal Ponderings. That's what I'm going to call it. Do we have another name for it yet?
Um. No, I think Papal Ponderings works.
I thought about papacy smear, but that sounds a little too vulgar. I was like, maybe too much. Let's talk about papal ponderings. Let's talk about Catholicism for 2 seconds.
So it should be noted that neither one of us have a background in Catholicism, but we do have a background in Mormonism, which is like Catholicism's weird little brother.
Little
Is that a
fanfic.
fair?
It's fair. Yeah, it's like it's like a spaghetti western. We saw what was happening. We're like, we'll take some of it, and then we're gonna put our own stuff in here too.
I think for my part, certainly, I have a lot of holy envy for Catholicism. I love cathedrals. I love the pomp and circumstance of it. I love the liturgy. I love the art. I love the history of it. I also am not blind to the fact that much of the problems of racism and colonialism were fueled by Catholicism in the world,
Yeah.
and that Catholicism has been plagued by crises of pedophilia and of how to use power and how to be holy. And so I think that these are all very quintessential human problems. And I love how they're, it's a great, I don't know. I love stories that have priests and and conclaves and stuff.
I
don't
mean,
know.
when we think about Catholicism and some of my favorite movies, oftentimes it is this organization and these people that I don't have a true connection to, other than
Yeah.
just like your weird cousin that. Well, we'll just mention it. Growing up Mormon, we were kind of taught not directly from powerful figures, but we were kind of taught to hate Catholics. There were some
Yeah.
books published by upper authorities in the 80s who were
Yeah.
like, by the way, Catholics, they are the great whore upon the earth. They are the
Yes.
evil church. And I remember as a kid being like, I don't know, my friend Joey is pretty cool. And his family seems to have a great time at Mass. And he's told me he's drank wine and he's like 9 years old. I don't know what else to say. But on that, yeah, with that in mind, I think what is interesting is we're going to look at the media representation of Catholicism in recent media as a way to prepare for the movie Conclave coming out soon with Ralph Fiennes.
Yeah.
It's supposed to hit theaters. It's been moved up. It might move again, but it's been moved up to October 25th, 2024. It looks like it's really well done. It looks pretty. It looks intense. There's bombs going off. It looks fun.
Ooh, exciting, fun.
Fun. So we're going to look at a handful of movies. with our first episode after our intro. We're going to look at Two Popes, which is 2019, Spotlight 2016, and Doubt from 2008. Following that, we're going to discuss two limited series you can find on HBO Max: The Young Pope with Jude Law, The New Pope with John Malkovich, and of course, we're going to finish up the series talking about Conclave and reviewing it with Rafe Fiennes.
Ralph Fiennes.
No, it's Rafe.
What?
Yes, it's a weird British thing. I had to learn it myself. I was like, Ralph Fiennes, Ralph Fiennes. The way it's said, it's like an old Gaelic and old English. It's Rafe.
Oh, okay, cool. I did
So,
not know that.
If we can
What do you
get him
learn?
on the pod, we're gonna make sure we.
Hey, Rafe Fiennes, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on the pod.
Rafe. You tell me if you can hear this.
Rafe Fiennes.
Yep, I heard that. Damn. I'm gonna have
All
to pay
right.
attention now when I'm like listening to podcasts or whatever about movies, see if ever anyone else gets it correct.
I literally found two interviews in the last couple of years that said Rafe, and I was like, "Am I being gaslit? What's happening here?" I was like, "Is their tea too strong? They burn their tongue? What is Rafe? Rafe Fiennes." Either way, we have some professors I've reached out to. We're hopefully going to have a couple of them on. We have some friends of mine who are Catholic, who I'm going to have on for short little bits. We're going to probably test something out in this series in which people send in short audio notes, and then we can kind of react to them. Just trying a couple things because I'd love to hear about what people's views on Catholicism are, how the church has changed, especially with Pope Francis in the last 10 years, and just kind of how the media misportrays or portrays them in lights they do and don't like, and what could be different. So get on your funny
propaganda
hats.
for the Church of Catholicism.
Catholic propaganda, baby. Or in this case, a lot of it seems to be like anti-Catholic
Some of it is,
propaganda.
yeah. Some of it is, yeah.
We're going to point out our blind spots real quick. We don't have Silence from Martin Scorsese, which is about Jesuits, but still.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of movies from the 40s and 50s, like The Cardinal, and that's 40, 50, 60s. The Cardinal, a handful of others that are much more positive about Catholicism. We're also not doing any of these Italian movies about like the saints or popes or like just Catholic praising films. That could be done a different time. This is more looking at the critical nature of film and television and how it portrays Catholicism. So enjoy your Militainment, folks, and get ready for wafers, wine, and funny hats.
What a tagline.
What a tagline. Papal Ponderings coming soon. Thanks again for listening. Be sure to share with anyone who's interested in film, filmmaking, film criticism, military, militainment, or Marvel while we're at it for this episode. And tune in again next week as we open up our Papal Ponderings series.